Hi everyone, my name is Cassandra Earkins and I have the distinct pleasure of authoring books with Tom Schimmer and Nicole Dimich, and we talk a lot about assessment, formative and summative and grading and all of those things. And I was asked, what could we do to, as principals, lead this work on our campuses? How do we help our teachers better understand what we really mean by good assessment to guide our instruction, which is what formative assessment was always meant to be. So I'd like to propose that we begin by modeling the very things we're asking teachers to do. And I actually think that walking through the list you see on this slide is the very way that we can help all students learn, including our adult learners. It turns out what's good for students with formative assessment is good for adults with formative assessment. So Dylan William wrote in his 2011 book, Embedded Formative Assessment, about 5 core strategies that really help us lead this work or do this work within our classrooms. And so what are some of the modeling components that we could do as leaders of adults? First, clarifying and sharing our understanding of what we even mean by good assessment. I found people can give me the right words. They can talk about what formative assessment is, but it's really difficult to actually do it. So do we have really clear and consistent understanding about all of our key terms? More than that, do we have a really clear picture of where our staff is relative to where our staff needs to be? So just like students have to strive toward standards, so too must teachers strive toward the standards of excellence in what assessment looks like. Can we clarify that? Can we have some end goals that we say this is what it's going to look like when it's done really well? And then once we know that, can we create learning targets for adults like I can write an accurate assessment. I can interpret the assessment results with accuracy in a manner that creates optimism for my learners. So we would want to create some learning expectations for ourselves as adults. I would post those expectations in the staff lounge. I'd have them in my staff bulletins. I'd have them in every staff meeting. We would be talking and talking and talking and talking about those until it almost became so rote they could give me back the information. I would create our campus goals around those, and I wouldn't let them go. One of the flaws I think we've experienced with initiatives in the past is it's been a one and done. Like we did that last year, but really, is it truly embedded this year? And so I would like to hold on to these targets just like we would for students until we achieve competency. So where are we headed? Do we have some really clear learning targets for what good assessments design and use would look like? And then can we map our way there and stick with it until we actually arrive? In and of itself, if we can just do that, that's going to be a big difference in whether or not this work gets implemented in our classrooms. Because today we kind of have the shopping cart analogy when it comes to professional learning. I go to a workshop and I like a little of this, so I put it in my shopping cart, and I like a little of this, so I put it in my shopping cart. And I go back to my classroom and I may or may not implement those things. But when I am with a team and we have a SMART goal at the building level or some goals at the building level, and I know I have to take these things, I have to put them in my cart, like it or not. This is what we're all working on. And then we hold each other mutually accountable to getting those things done. That's where that gain is going to actually happen. So then all of our conversations that would follow once we know what our targets are wrapped up in helping bring those targets to life. What evidence do we have from our classroom assessments to prove proficiency? Do we agree on what mastery looks like? What do we determine to assess, and how do we determine to best assess it? What are the right times to assess mid-lesson, post-lesson? How can instruction and assessment be seamless? What could we do to make that happen? There is a plethora of structured conversations that we could design so that when staff come to a staff meeting, we save all of the nuts and bolts and things they need to know for little written news bulletins, and we use all of that staff time to actually try some things. Now, as a principal, when I mean try some things, I mean I'm going to structure, hey, this time let me show you how to have a pinwheel dialogue, and we'll talk about whether or not we can use assessments to increase confidence in our learners. And we've got different articles, and let's talk about it. And then at the end of that, I would step back and say, you just experienced a structured dialogue. It is a protocol that you could take right back into your classrooms, work as a team to tell me how you could integrate a strategy like this. So I'm not just modeling, I'm being transparent in what I'm modeling and how I'm modeling. And I'm making sure that they know that absolutely everything I do is to try to lead the way by showing them what it could look like, and then giving them time to talk about how could this work with kindergarten? How would this work in science? What are we going to do to implement that kind of a strategy or modify it so we could implement it? And then providing the feedback that moves the learning forward. I'm going to anchor this right in, again, those learning targets. I'm going to anchor it right in the work that we are producing. So when I'm doing my teacher evaluation system, I want to make sure I'm tapping into those things that we said were so important. I'm going into your classrooms. I'm watching for these very things that I'm asking for. Do you have good formative assessments? Are you making modifications as the evidence is emerging? Are you getting to accuracy as you examine the results? Do you have students who have more hope and optimism as a result of the work that you've been doing? So all of my feedback is going to be in support of what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I'm dogging it. I'm just not going to let it go. I would also want to activate the learners as resources to one another, a really important part, so that I'm putting them in teams. They're practicing with common assessments. They're looking at their student achievement data. They're analyzing their test results. They're really pushing on whether or not, if 3 kids got the same score, are they equally proficient just because they got the same score? What about when they don't have the same ones wrong? Is that equitable? Does that mean they have the same level of proficiency? So I would want those teams to work together to talk about the really tough stuff. What does mastery look like, and how do you know it when you see it? And I want them to be able to turn to each other to ask those critical kinds of questions, and I want them to bring those questions that they would have in their smaller team to the bigger campus conversation, because a professional collaborative team is not a PLC by itself, right? That bigger, when we all work together campus-wide, that's where the true learning community is. And so 3rd grade is sharing with 6th grade what they've just learned, and social studies is helping art understand how you can have kids read complex text when you're not an ELA teacher. There's all this work that we would do together. And finally, are they activating themselves as learners? So are they experiencing, practicing, talking about how do I set goals? How do I monitor my own goals in service, again, of that first bullet point, clarifying and sharing our understanding and our learning intentions. So can I do it first, and then can I help my students do it? In my work, I get to spend a lot of time inspiring teachers on how to have students set goals. And not long ago, a kindergarten teacher said, we left one of your sessions. We were so on fire. We were so excited. And we went back and we had all these goal sheets, and we were going to get our kids going. And a couple weeks in, my team and I were overwhelmed by the sheer paperwork, and we were lost and confused about it. And one of the first things we decided was we're going to have to stop. We have to try it first for ourselves, so we really even know what we're talking about before we turn around and ask our 5-year-old students to engage in this process. And it was such a deep insight, simple, it seemed on the surface, but so profound in that she realized, you don't just launch this work without deeply understanding it. So I think it would be really important for teachers to experience it so they deeply understand it. So I would want them to attach their goals to our campus learning targets, which we're not letting go of until we actually accomplish some of these things, and to have all those meaningful conversations in the middle about whether or not we are actually arriving. This isn't something that you do in a year. This isn't something that you do in 2 years. This is a lifelong journey. And assessment is the heart of teaching and learning, right? It's how we know how our students go. And it's what we would want to rely on to get the best possible information so we can be the best possible teacher. As such an important cornerstone to our practice, we need to dog it. We need to be constantly sharpening the saw, improving our practices, discussing what works. If you wrap this all up with a bow and you turn to John Hattie and his 800 meta-analysis where he talks about visible learning, at the very end of that book in his synthesis, he says the best way. Really, I have to say from my own professional experience, the only way for us to continue to improve our practice is to sit next to other practitioners who are making theory real in the practical moments and are talking about from the place of evidence, not just from the place of theory or wishful thinking, from the place of evidence, is our best effort working? If it is, why and how? What do we share and with whom? If it isn't, what have we learned? How do we fix it? I just want to add, in the beginning, I mentioned that we would do this as leaders at the campus level, but I want to say my last role was at the district level, and I think it's just as important to model from that perspective as well. So when we think about our adult learners are the principals and other building leaders or directors with whom we work. So how do we take this up a notch and the entire system engages in this work? Because we can help principals better understand how to clarify learning targets. In fact, I was working with a school system. We had 25 elementary schools, and those principals decided that they were going to function as a professional learning community. And with the support of the central office team, they began this very important work of clarifying their understanding about what assessment literacy was, setting some expectations that they could bring back to their campuses to share with teachers, engaging teachers in identifying quality criteria, having those confident conversations. And so at the district level, we were working with principals to help shape what some of those conversations might look like so they could bring them back and activate them at the campus level. So this is an all hands on deck effort. And there's something all of us could be doing to help our teachers and ourselves better understand this work. Finally, the last piece to modeling these 5 practices is to make certain that you are clear that you are modeling that. The best way for us to be powerful learners, and now I'll turn to Brené Brown, is that we make ourselves vulnerable first, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take standing up in front of our staff and saying, look, I'm practicing feedback just like you are. And so I'm going to do my best, and together we're going to learn what works, what doesn't work. So I'm right here with you on this journey, and it's a lifelong exploration. The more I read and practice and try and watch and sit next to teams, the more I learn, I really still don't know. So to make yourselves vulnerable, to be in those team meetings, to learn with your colleagues, to take that conversation back to the staff to say, oh my gosh, you know what? The music teachers just figured out something amazing. Let's talk about what they've learned and engineer those effective conversations again. And finally, in conclusion or in closure, really sticking with those learning targets that we've created for ourselves as a staff and making certain that we really do understand how to use good assessment to guide our instruction. I wish you the best on this learning journey that you are embarking upon.